All right. Again, thank you so much for joining us for the 2021 Business Leadership Institute, the new era of equity. It is our time. And so just wanted to say I really enjoyed Kim's presentation. I thought it was incredible in the fact that it inspired us, and it's all about what today is going to be focused on, and that is seizing the moment. I should introduce myself. My name is Latonda Baumgardner. I am the Career and Professional Development Director for the Chicago chapter, and so excited to have you a part of the career advancement track for this morning. So to get us started, because we are a little delayed, I want to go ahead and quickly introduce our moderator for the career advancement track, Jean Harvey Johnson. She is a senior vice president and general manager for Fiserv, and she will be taking the lead on engaging the panel, and as well as those of you who are joining us today. We will have an opportunity to ask questions via chat, as well as I will have an opportunity to verbally bring you I shouldn't say verbally, audibly bring you on to talk as well. So look forward to this engaging conversation. If it was anything like our prep session, I think we're in for a treat. Welcome, everyone. And Jean, it's all yours.
Well, you all are certainly in for a treat. We have an excellent panel here for you today. I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to meet Tania White, Elena Anderson, and Jason Smith. They represent a broad cross-section of experiences and perspectives that I think will be highly influential today. So our topic this morning, well, firstly, to thank the National Black MBA Chicago chapter for defining such a really valuable topic, the new era of equity. Our time. That must sound good to everyone in this room, certainly as good as it sounds to me. I think it's really a momentous transition point that we've seen in 2020 and that continues into 2021. But we really want to focus this conversation. And I want to note that it should be a conversation across the panelists and the attendees so that we really do utilize our chat features and really ask questions, because that's how this will be the most valuable for everyone. It's our time. We're going to talk about a couple of things, but I'd like to start the panel discussion by really asking each of our panelists, as we begin to talk to each of them, to focus with one question in the back of their mind. How? What are the tactical examples or tactical practices that we can take to take advantage of this equity in our time? So just to start us out very, very clearly, I think as experienced professionals, we have all had the very tired experience of hearing from talent acquisition associates or from hiring managers, or sometimes even from our leadership, that there are no qualified African Americans available for positions in our companies or in our industries. And I'd really like to hear from everyone around this topic about how we should specifically, tactically respond when we hear comments like these coming from our leaders. Elena, is that something that you'd like to start with? I'm having difficulty hearing you. Well, I'm gonna drive that question to Tania as our representative from human resources, from a human resources perspective. How would you suggest responding to those assertions by some of our colleagues and associates?
Good afternoon or morning, everybody. First and foremost, where are you looking for your talent at is the question, right? So when I hear someone say that they cannot find qualified candidates for a position, that's the first thing that I ask, where are you looking at? And then for us on the other side, though, if we are potential applicants, then the question for us is, how are we putting ourselves out there? How are we presenting ourselves? Are we on LinkedIn? Are we on these platforms where potential job seekers, job employers can find us? Do they know we exist? Do they know what skill set we can bring? And so are we tooting our own horns? What types of things are we doing to make sure they know we're here, we're available, and we're ready? Are we making ourselves available through networking opportunities? How are we showing up? And are we positioning ourselves to be picked and to be recognized for opportunities that come our way?
That point about visibility ties in very nicely with what we just heard from Nicole Johnson Scales around, are we presenting ourselves in the right environments? Are we visible where that is valued? I think that's an important point. And your question back to our associates about where are they looking, I think is a very specific and helpful tactical question that can help us realign how our businesses and how our associates look at this topic. Elena, I wanted to make sure that I came to you on this question as well.
Thanks, Jean. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, had a problem with my settings. Thanks so much for the question. Thanks for the invitation. I just wanted to augment what Tania said and also mention that from a very tactical perspective, it's mind-blowing how the leadership of predominantly white institutions really don't have a lens into the Black experience. And that includes understanding the whole array of diverse professional organizations that are available to them to draw talent from. And so a very tactical exercise that I've had to do is make introductions to the National Black MBA Association, to the Executive Leadership Council, to the Twigo Foundation, to the Urban League, so that predominantly white institutions, the leadership has more knowledge of these DPOs and understands them to be talent pipelines as they seek to fill talent gaps across the spectrum from entry level to senior.
Absolutely. Jason, I saw you nodding your head. Jason Smith, is there anything you'd like to share about how we might approach that question from our associates?
Thanks, Jean. I had a couple of things I jotted down right based on this question. One, I think is important to seek out mentorship and coaching as an individual. Looking for those opportunities. Some of the programs that were mentioned by Elena are those areas that can provide some of that to the individuals. Seeking out sponsors within your company, folks that will speak to you and your strengths when you're not in the room. Being courageous in doing that. Something else that I think is important is also in our own space of mental sanity and things that we need to work through. Seek some counseling outside work to work through some of the cultural barriers that hold us back. And you don't see those until you start to go through these coaching classes, and you start to see that there is a barrier for ourselves that we have to also get past that will also help us progress as individuals as well. And then lean forward in your communities and also your companies, and to help drive initiatives that will leave a lasting legacy on those behind you. I think that's most important as well, is that we don't just look out for ourselves, but also do and drive things that help create an environment, a cultural environment, talent environment that's conducive for those that will come behind us in those companies. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There have been studies that have shown that more diverse leaders hire more diverse candidates. So it's interesting how we might seed that thought amongst our peers and executives and talent acquisition, hiring managers in positions of leadership, because we've certainly seen, and there has been quantitative analysis that have proven that when you have a more diverse workforce, you tend to build on that success and hire more diverse candidates. Largely a networking effect, or as you said, Elena, being able to surface to leaders new organizations, new pathways to finding talent. Yeah. Jason, any thoughts of yours around how we might drive towards a more equitable approach to hiring and opportunities? Jason Evans.
Okay, I didn't know I didn't know if we were still on Jason Smith, but I think first off, that's a really great question, and it leads very well from the conversation that we started here. And I think that one of the biggest things is really having organizations reconsider how they go about their engagement with talent, right? I think, one of the, as I was kind of preparing for this, one of the things that I really looked at was in 2000 and I think it was 17, most of our organizations, I think it was Harvard Business Journal said 90% of jobs were filled internally, whether that be a lateral movement or whether that be a promotional movement, right? And we flashed to 2021, and that's dropped to 28%. And in fact, LinkedIn posted a statistic that said 40% of people who changed jobs during the pandemic were not even looking. So what does that tell me, right? So the talent level has changed. The way the avenues has changed, and so different companies are gonna have to consider a different bold engagement strategy when they think about talent. And I think some of the things that speaking from a millennial perspective that we're really considering is work-life balance and flexibility. I think those are two separate things sometimes. But we during the pandemic, I could, if you allow me to share my examples, I was, or prior to the pandemic, I was traveling an hour and a half north in Chicago to get to work, an hour and a half back. Pandemic hits. I've repurposed that time and created different businesses, 2 different businesses, a capital group, real estate investment, and I have also continued to excel and advance in my career. Which brings me to my second point about what different companies need to consider, and that is that in spite of being in this remote/hybrid space, that young talent still wants to advance in their careers and take very aggressive approaches without necessarily being in that office. So companies will have to consider how do they still foster that, how, going back to what Jason Smith said, how do they engage from the mentorship programs or telling high potential that they're actually high potential before they leave. And those different activities, because we now are realizing that we definitely have a voice in this, as you're seeing different quarters come through our social platforms and say, hey, we're interested in your talent. So in order to have to continue to develop homegrown talent that understands the core values and principles, companies will have to be very intellectually curious about changing that approach of looking for talent when they actually need it, to consistent engagement with their workforce. So as I think about those who are listening in, my call to action, kind of going back to your first question to Elena, and is that we have to have that confidence. We have to have that confidence coming in, knowing that, hey, we are intellectually curious about our career, and that we are qualified for this, and that we need to bring up, if we want additional flexibility, that needs to be a considering factor when we're evaluating that company. We have to be able to, understand that we're authentic, and that we need to bring our full self. And then lastly, I think that we need to realize that there are conversations that are happening about what's going on in society. There are things that really matter to us that enable us to necessarily bring ourselves to work, our full self to work. So we need to make sure that as we're evaluating these companies, that that we are really bringing, asking those questions to say, how did your company react to this situation? Or how does your company look at work-life balance? Am I coming in making sure that we're making our decisions based off of what truly matters to us and making that way. And I think you're starting to see that in a lot of different spaces. If you kept up with Netflix, you've seen what they've asked for in that situation, and so many different situations that we have to make sure that we are the crafters on as well.
Jason, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that I see across businesses is that while there's a conventional wisdom that the maturity of answering some of these questions comes with experience and with time, I've certainly seen our younger professionals, our millennial professionals, really driving for change, really seeking to push and hold accountable our organizations for how they respond in this moment. I really want to congratulate our younger professionals for taking that stance and being so bold. It makes me think, though, about how we might consider building a more inclusive and unbiased culture as a goal for our organizations, but also how we structurally hold them accountable for the things that they say in the moment. How do we build structures that support the enthusiasm that we saw for diversity, equity, and inclusion as a result of George Floyd? I would love to hear from our panelists around how we structurally hold this more inclusive and more unbiased culture within organizations, but force stronger accountability. Elena, I think you maybe had some thoughts around that.
Sure. Thanks, Jean. Very timely question. I saw that Bloomberg issued a survey today, and I'm a financial professional. I'm on Bloomberg News all the time, and I consider it a credible source because Bloomberg is a data source. It is left-leaning, but the crux of their business is to provide data, and the crux of this article is data-oriented. So I'm just going to quote a couple of things from the Bloomberg article that came out this morning, and it's regarding their survey of the S&P 100. I think they had 76 respondees, and they're querying companies on the racial makeup of their workforce. And they started this survey, as you can imagine, in the summer of 2020. And they are noting that companies on this survey have added at least $3.9 billion in financial commitments to causes meant to improve the conditions for Black people in the US. And that's on top of the $8 billion pledged in the summer of 2020. Many are increasing their recruiting from HBCUs. A large portion have established commitments to recruit from minority-owned businesses and include them in their supply chains. And so there's been a lot of commitments made. I think they note that 1 billion or so has been deployed at this point, but that the racial makeup of the workforces in the surveyed companies within the S&P 100 has not moved. So who's the onus on to enforce accountability, if not us? It's our responsibility to enforce accountability. It's our responsibility to make sure that the external voice, the marketing voice, the pitch voice that these companies are conveying matches their internal reality. And who's going to do that enforcement if not us? I think what's important for us to consider is how we do that. I think that there's a way to engage in these conversations that advance both the mission and your career, because there is also a way to undercut the mission and your career when engaging in these conversations. I could get down to brass knuckles because I have had to in my organization, which is a predominantly white institution and an investment bank here in Chicago. I've had to be a convener, and I have had to massage and display quite a lot of empathy to our leadership in engaging in these conversations, understanding that they're coming from a space of a very acute space of not understanding the Black experience, and all of a sudden from their perspective being elevated to a space where they had to make commitments and statements that maybe they were not ready to make from a point of understanding. So there's a lot of level setting, a lot of raising the brain line. And I know a lot of people say, it's not our job to have to be the educator. I will leave that to us to determine what you're comfortable with in that regard. It has worked for me to approach these conversations with empathy, to do some level setting, to have the whole Juneteenth conversation on a Zoom with my team, and to be a convener, and to make sure that those conversations are productive and that we move the ball forward and that they're metrics based. In addition, we want to leverage conveners like the National Black MBA Association so that our organizations know that they have somewhere to go when they need to seek talent, seek information, et cetera.
Absolutely, Elena. And, I can tell from your thoughtful approach to just even shaping that answer that your emotional quotient is really high. Bringing that skill to the table of being able to convene different parties, to be sensitive to uh, their ignorance and create a learning opportunity for organizations is really a great approach. I'm really interested in hearing more from the team about what is our intrinsic personal responsibility. So, Elena, you talked about, yes, here are the things that we need to do as professionals within our organizations. Who will hold them accountable if not us? But what are some of the other things tactically that we as individuals can do within our organizations, not only to help support our organizations and their goals and aspirations, but internally to work on our development and to seize our day very specifically for our career growth, for our career development, for our personal development, and personal satisfaction. It was really fascinating to me during the last session. Nicole Johnson Scales talked about really creating a distinction between strengths and talents, really focusing on what builds your energy. And she had this whole presentation, a whole slide that was a clover leaf about your purpose. I'd really love to hear, and perhaps Tania, you can speak to some of this. How do you work with yourself internally? How do you prepare yourself internally to think about how you can seize the day, how you can grow and develop, how you can finesse that emotional quotient so that you are raised within your organization as a visionary, as a leader, as a convener, as Elena mentioned?
Yeah, thank you, Jane, for that question. Just as you stated, what Nicole presented earlier today was absolutely amazing. I was taking notes and I'm like, yes, 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 exactly what you're saying. That's what you're supposed to be doing. And so when we think about how do we seize the day and how do we position ourselves, one, we have to know our worth. We need to know what we're bringing to the table in relation to what we're trying to accomplish in the organization. And so we talk about growing within the organization, right? We talk about maybe going to a C-level position. And so what does that position look like? And what do I bring? What are my unique qualities and skill sets and abilities that I can bring to show up to do this job and do it in excellence? And then how do I show that I'm able to do this? Am I raising my hand when opportunities present themselves? Am I at the table? Am I giving solution-focused answers to results that they're looking for? So those are some of the things that we need to really be able to think about. We need to be able to self-assess and look at what our own gaps are and what those barriers are, and then come up with a personal plan on how we're going to address those barriers. And what is that going to also look like? When we talk about seizing the day and we're talking about having our moment and having an equitable moment, one of the things we need to know, and I go back to knowing your worth, knowing what you bring to the table in relation to the position that you're going for, what really does that look like? Not just a job description, I can do the job, but what else are you bringing? What else can you do? What else are you contributing that's going to help change that organization? Not just the position you're in, but the organization as a whole. How are you contributing, not just in your silo, but across company lines? And what does that look like? And so those are some of the things that I think about as I'm thinking about Nicole and seizing the day and reassessing myself and my ability. Yeah, I can go on and on that. So I'll just pause right there.
No, I love it. I think there's clearly an aspect of personal reflection and internal development that you can focus on to help define your path and shape how you work through your next steps. But I think it's also important to really highlight for our attendees and for our colleagues, what are the things that are external to you that you can ask for from your organization, from your company, from your sponsors and your mentors? How do you begin to think about that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the personal connections. And so when you think about the position that you sit in and you think about your growth and you look at external, who do you have around you? Who are you reaching out to? Who is your mentor? Who are you looking to help guide you, right, in those areas? And so asking with your company, looking at training opportunities, stretch goals. Sometimes we say, and I've heard people say, well, I'm not going to do anything extra if I'm not getting paid for it. Well, put yourself at the table and do that stretch goal, right? Raise your hand for that project and show that you can get the job done. Sometimes you have to show up before you actually show up. And so, you've heard the adage, dress for the position that you want, dress for the job that you want, show up for the job that you want. And so those are some of the things that you need to do. If you identify someone outside of your organization who is already in that position, have a candid conversation about what it took to get there. And what do they see in terms of where you are and what you may need to do to continue to grow yourself into that area. But your network is going to be key. Who's around you is going to be key. Who's helping you to get to that next place is going to be key. Who are you talking to? Who is your circle? Who are the eagles around you? Because if I'm trying to go to that next level, I want to make sure that I can speak the language when I get into the room. And so I want to start those conversations now and start having the language conversations of the C-suite before I'm actually a C-suite member. So that when I'm there, I know what I'm talking about and I can speak to all those key things that I need to speak to. And so building those relationships and getting yourself prepared.
Again, there's that theme of visibility
Mm-hmm.
and how you show up and preparedness that I think runs through both Nicole's conversation and this discussion, which I think is really, really interesting. I want to shift topics just a bit before we move on. We're in such a unique space. We had this very horrible moment in 2020 where everyone came together and paid attention to the racial inequity and challenges that we face. And we've progressed from that summer quite considerably. But I am really interested in sort of, as we transition, we hit COVID. We had some really harsh realities about our workforce, about our work environment, some great change that occurred structurally within the businesses that we support on the heels of this very awful moment. I'm really curious about how we've begun to think, either personally or organizationally, about this new normal post-COVID. How we take advantage of some of the change that has occurred and what are reasonable expectations, and then what are grand expectations about how that shift in normal can affect your career and can affect, the challenges that you put forth to your organization. I'm really interested in hearing from a broad group of panelists here about how you anticipate the new normal and what you could do within this environment to position yourself for next. Jason, do you have some thoughts here?
I think
You had mentioned sort of post-COVID, that during COVID you took advantage of some of the time that you had to develop alternate streams of income, to focus on new revenue sources, to really branch out. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
absolutely. Jason, I'm sorry. I always get
Jason Evans.
But it's all good. So, I mean, there's a lot of things different to consider during this time. For a lot of the millennials, I think that we're seeing that, we're seeing the world a little bit more open. We have more time to consider, what the next 20 to 30 years look like. And so sitting in organizations and really analyzing, like, really at 60, this is what it's going to be. This time allowed us to have time to ideate and to think and to press measures. I mean, to press, to apply, as we would say, apply pressure upward. And during that time, I think a lot of what you'll see, what I've seen in my peer groups is starting different organizations, having and going back to some of the other conversations, starting different ERG groups to foster more rich conversations, but being the leader in those groups to make that different change, right? And as well as in our communities, continuing those conversations to help our partners and our colleagues in multiple different industries, showcasing like what good looks like in those environments as well, to foster and continue the conversation, but also taking onus and understanding like this is not just our career, because I think we see it a little bit bigger. This is our livelihood. And this is how we're going to provide for our future. And if this is a little uncertain and doesn't necessarily see us in the same light. I'm going to A, take this into my hands, but B, work to showcase a larger reason for being here. And if an organization doesn't get with that, the good thing in this time is there are a lot of organizations that will, but going back to asking those questions, finding those different spaces, going to, a lot of the different social platforms to learn what's happening and different avenues to get there and connecting us in so many different ways are things that I'm seeing that we're taking advantage of during this time.
Very nice. Very nice. Jason Smith, we've been talking about DEI and inclusion efforts and initiatives, and how in some ways they have not manifested to the promise that was intended. I know that you have a lot of insight into the way the Fed has been responding to and establishing initiatives internally. I'd love to hear if there are any things that you can share about how the Federal Reserve Bank has responded to this and what they've established as practices.
Yeah, I guess I always have to start with I'm not that my comments are my own and not that of the Federal Reserve, and so I'll give that disclaimer as always when I start any sort of banking meeting as well. And so when you think about the Federal Reserve, also remember that there are 12 banks, and so Fed of Chicago has its own culture, organization, president, vice president, and governance structure. What's important to note for a 107-year-old organization, governmental, pseudo-governmental organization, is that the Fed, prior to many of I like to think of it as our mission or what we've been embarking on the last 2 years, the Fed did start some of this work as part of a strategic vision, its core values in essence. And so we were really embarking on creating an environment that was rich and thinking about inclusion. I think what manifested itself afterwards were the pieces of equity and diversity. And really, I think the bank and leadership took a hard look at itself and really not necessarily didn't like what it saw in the mirror, but wanted to change how it was treating itself, right? Meaning its representatives, its folks that had committed to the Fed for umpteen years. And so what we started to think through is how does DE&I become part of our DNA? And that's a difficult challenge when you have not had that part of your culture for 107 years. But really, making DE&I part of our DNA is both a top-down approach, and as we talked about in our panel discussion it's an uphill battle, and also you have to pull up from the grassroots as well. And so what you saw from the Fed, this is pre-George Floyd and pre-our kind of what we've defined as our beginning of our mission here in this age group. The Fed, started to add individuals, women and minorities to the board here in Chicago, which I think is important to have that piece, right? Because it's all about that, folks have to buy in at the top, whether it's the board, then the executive level, and then senior management, and then all the way down, it has to be buy-in. But I'll get to the point. So adding board members, both in Chicago and the Detroit branch. And then secondly, creating the DE&I committee, which I've been a part of helping to stand up with other senior leaders and executives in the Fed, adding a DE&I team. So adding governance, one and first. And then secondly, I think Jason was alluding to this, starting to have those grassroots conversations, what we call Fed Labs, where you are bringing in scenarios of cultural barriers, talent barriers, and having those discussions at the staff level, where we're sitting around the table before COVID, and then when COVID happened virtually, talking about issues, working through them, because I, for one, am not a DE&I expert. I wouldn't, no matter how much work I do and how many spears and shields I catch and work towards and be a warrior for this cause, I'm not an expert. And so the training that we underwent, the Fed Labs where we had the discussions at the staff level and leadership level were important. And then when we talk about accountability, we started to think through, okay, well, we've done surveys over the years, and I think all organizations have, but what have we done with that data? Mm-hmm. How have we held ourselves accountable for the results of that data? Well, when you start taking a closer look at that data, you see that we've got a leaky bucket. Yeah, you bring talent in, you march talent down LaSalle Street and bring them in on Jackson, but guess what? They're going out the back door because there are cultural barriers. And then we get back to some of the points raised earlier by the other panelists, that talent and promotion barriers, and talent development and then promotion barriers. And so we started to take a real hard look with the DE&I committee at the cultural barriers, because that can get overlooked, I think. We talk about promotions, we can talk about internal development, external development, but if the culture does not permeate this sort of environment, the processes around promoting people won't be there. The environment in which people get promoted, and folks won't feel like they deserve it. So you have to work on both aspects of this D&I space, and I think that the D&I community has been really looking at this hard. Talent and cultural issues. What are the barriers? How do we get over them? How do we measure them? And then the accountability piece says, how do we report these? And how do we ensure that these are baked into the goals and objectives of each and every business line, team, individual, all the way up to the executive committee of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago? And let's measure ourselves about that. Let's create a strategic plan around DE&I to hold ourselves accountable. Let's create some metrics around this to hold ourselves accountable. Let's create reporting around this, and let's be active in our data analytics to understand the root causes of trends. What are the root causes and what's causing it? So those are some of the aspects that the Fed of Chicago has done. And then a couple other things that I think are really important from a cultural standpoint, and also from just a general business standpoint. Culturally, we always had what we call ES&Gs, but ERGs, we've always had them. What we've seen is empowerment of those groups to be able to focus on talent development as well, to really focus on and providing a safe space culturally for individuals to get together, to help drive our communication outward about how we as a bank see different things that are happening in our external environment. That never happened before. And so those things are now starting to happen. Are we there yet? I think we've got a lot of practice. And sometimes the groups, there's some conflict between, you may have one group feel one way about, a topic happening with the us moving out of the Middle East, and another group feeling a different way about that. Right. And so you have these conflicts, but we've been working through that from a communication standpoint.
Yeah, I think I've seen the way our ERGs can be used so much more strategically, to reference Elena's original point about convening topics, being a safe space to engage in education and promotion of ideas. I think that's a really key point. How do you use those ERGs very strategically? It's interesting that the work that you talk about happening at the Fed of Chicago really aligns very nicely with the study that Elena pointed out at the beginning of the session. S&P 100 companies, Bloomberg has done a study separately to say, let's also hold you accountable. Let's see what's happening within the industry and within the market, so that we can then have a broad benchmark for the Fed of Chicago to say, here's how we're doing, not only internally against our metrics, but how do we look externally across a broader group of organizations? It's interesting.
Jean, can I add something to what Jason shared?
The FSP piece as well, which I think is a financial service initiative. That group is a consortium of financial companies that also share their diversity data. That's another benchmark to say, how are we doing since the last time we met and this survey was taken, in terms of how individuals are showing up, how they feel about our organizations at each financial organization. And I believe we're up to 13 organizations now that are reporting in data and survey results of how the diversity is going and diversity efforts. I'm sorry, Tana.
Tania, you wanted to interject as well.
Yeah, Jason was saying some really good things, and I was just jotting down some notes, and I just wanted to add a couple of things. Sorry, I'm that HR guru who always has something to say about HR culture type stuff, right? So, one of the things that you talked about that I absolutely love, when you talked about DEI being a part of the DNA of the organization, and that is so true. And with the DNA of any organization, with DNA, it's not going to change, right? It's going to be like that. And so, if DEI becomes a part of your organization DNA, then that's a constant check. That means you're always looking at your initiatives. You're always recalibrating and shifting and doing what needs to be done for your organization. You mentioned for a quick second about employees exiting your organization because of the culture, right? And so, we oftentimes in our organizations do surveys, and we get the surveys back. And to your point, what do we do with this information? And so we have to make sure that we constantly are doing a culture check within our organization. So in looking at those surveys, we're assessing, how we've made those changes. But here's the thing, you have to close the circle, because we're getting the data from other organizations and all the other branches, but are we sharing that information with the employees? Are we telling them, hey, you know what? We heard you. Here's how we're doing, and here's what we're going to do to change and or redo what we haven't done correctly. And so just making sure that gap is closed. And so that's another layer of accountability, because when we're transparent and we say your survey revealed that we didn't meet the mark, but we're going to do something different, they're going to hold us to that. And then we have to continue to repeat that information. So just want to share that.
That's a really great point. And just to add to that, where we've done what we have our town halls, where we bring in the teams, we bring in our divisions, and we're talking through the numbers, we're talking through our efforts. And obviously embedded with each division, each team, there are goals. And so it's a conversation that cannot not be had, right? And so at the end of the year, which is right now for folks, that performance discussion, we're talking about how did you show up? How did you perform? How did you lead? How were you a part of this? How did you really integrate yourself in all aspects of this DNA, integrate this piece into your DNA from DE&I standpoint? And you're starting to see that traction. I wouldn't say that we're perfect. I think that as an organization, again, I go back to a long history. It takes a while to do that, but you've got it from the top, and you're doing the grassroots efforts. And somewhere along the lines, you'll meet in the middle through training, development, reassessments of processes, procedures. I mean, our jobs, in essence, are very technical across the board. The Fed is by nature. And so we have very intelligent and smart people, but that doesn't always equate to an understanding of cultural barriers. And so we work really hard to find those, identify those gaps, and try to close them as much as you possibly can, especially given the world that's around us, right? Which we know makes it very difficult to do. So
I love Jason. Yeah, I love Jason that the Fed of Chicago has really focused on quantifying what has been happening within their diversity efforts. I think, as we know, things that are measured are valued within the organization, and things that are valued within the organization are measured. So driving your organizations to track these efforts, to encourage them to recognize that outside organizations are tracking this as well, is a great way to provide sort of two varying perspectives on balancing and checking the organization for change. We're coming down to the close of our session. I want to make sure that we address some of the questions that our audience members may have, that our participants may have. But I'd like to just really stress again, just all of the attention that's focused in this space. If we can address it strategically, either personally, ourselves, through relationships that we have, through our ERGs, through convening special groups and sources and task forces to address these moments, I think we will begin to see the change that we've been seeking for a very long time. Want to just quickly give Latonda an opportunity to call out any of the questions that exist in the chat that we might want to have our panelists expand on. Is there anything that we'd like to highlight? I see, Tania, that you've commented about diversity quota not being enough to really represent change within an organization. Tania, can you speak on that more directly?
Yes, absolutely. So the question that came in was about how do we not just be a number, and how can an organization just not meet the diversity quota, air quotes, right? And so what I was sharing was that, one, it's not enough to just have a quota. Oh, we've hired so many Black and Brown, Asian people, so now we've met our number. But we really do have to professionally challenge our leaders on true initiatives that impact us as members of our organization. And so part of that is having employee focus groups, coming up with initiatives that you can present to your leadership, that you can present to your organization to say, here are other diversity initiatives that matter to me as an employee. So when you have people or organizations and leaders talk about DEI and they talk about how they want to make a difference and how they really want to support and how they want to do all these great things, you bring them to the table and you call them to the carpet and say, you know what, I can lead this initiative. You just got to approve it. Here's what I need you to do, and give them options, because sometimes they may not know, right? So give options for them in terms of what they can do, but create groups so that your voice truly can be heard and you're not just counted as a number, but you truly are represented and you are a part of the movement of the organization towards that.
Yeah, you have to really lean in on these things, because until we have a representation of our community in these organizations, you will just be a number. And so if you're not leaning in, if you're not engaged, then it's not helping the process, because it will move with or without you. And so it's better to be the conductor on the train and the engineer than to be just a passenger. And because if you are just a passenger, I think long term, when you get off the train and retire and go on to other things, guess what? Someone's going to get on and have to deal with the same mess that you could have probably helped to make change and drive change in. And so that is my view on it. But I also see myself as being an active member. So.
Yeah, I think I'm sure a lot of people in your social circle and professional circle see you in that same way. I certainly have that impression from our conversation today. I also want to draw out for the broader group of attendees and listeners and panelists. The NASDAQ recently announced that all of their listed companies are going to be required to have a person of color and a woman on their board of directors. And they also announced very plainly that 75% of their listed companies do not currently adhere to that mandate today. So there is going to be an opportunity for all of these NASDAQ listed companies to seek out women and people of color to support their business efforts from an advisory position. And I'd love to hear our thoughts about what impact that can have from a top-down perspective, having greater representation in the boardroom, but then how we can personally think about our career aspirations and our personal growth to create opportunities for growth and development for ourselves as well. Elena, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Thanks, Jean. I look at companies all the time, and we have an integrated ESG approach. So you can imagine that we're looking at board diversity as part of our approach to identifying securities for our portfolios. There is an optimistic and a pessimistic angle towards board diversity. One, the optimistic side is that it's great to have more diversity in the boardroom, especially from a strategic perspective. Hopefully it serves as a check and balance on management's strategic initiatives to make sure that they're more diverse and inclusion as the companies go to market. So you do want that. On the pessimistic side, what I've seen is that a lot of the same people getting tapped for the same board roles. So are we identifying new talent and bringing new voices to the table? Not necessarily at this moment, but certainly there's an opportunity to do that. The other pessimistic angle is, from a board governance perspective, do you really get involved in the nitty-gritty day-to-day of line management? Not necessarily. So what are your line managers doing around diversifying the actual staff of the organization? So it's great to have more diversity at the board level. It should impact strategy. It should impact how you go to market. But what does that mean for the line staff, the day-to-day professionals in the organization from a diversity perspective? This doesn't have to be an either or, obviously, should be a both and. And we'd like to see more both and efforts in terms of diversity that actually result in numbers. So what's the NASDAQ saying about, we want your organization to represent America? So I need 14% of your staff to be Black so that you can be listed. I don't think NASDAQ's going to go there.
That's
So
a nice challenge.
I mean, there's more work to be done.
That's a nice challenge. I appreciate that, largely because it does extend down, as we've talked about during this session, how we can affect change at every level, and where do we exert that influence so that we're holding organizations accountable for change, that we're experiencing the benefits of this enlightened mind shift that we've had over the last 20 months. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I really thank all of you for your contributions today in talking about, how we shape this new era of equity. I think I'd like to just ask if we have any closing statements that our panelists would like to share.
So,
This is such a personal topic. Um, that I'd love to just hear a small note before we close from each of our panelists about the value of this kind of work. Can we start with you, Jason Evans?
Absolutely. I mean, as I think about it for myself, and as I think about everyone listening in, one of the biggest things I'll say is continue to apply pressure. These type of discussions, bring them back into your different organizations. Continue to engage in so many different ways, and make sure that you continue to see your organization as just somewhere where you make money. Because the reality is they provide something greater. They are here because they provide something greater for our world. And that's why you're probably at that organization. So make sure that you are bringing, your best self to the workplace, as well as your ideas, your thoughts, and continue to apply pressure to elevate the conversation, to show your intellectual curiosity of where you want to go and where you want to be in your careers.
I love that. Thank you. Anyone else? I think that's a wonderful
Just
way
real
to close.
quick,
Certainly.
don't undervalue yourself. Don't be afraid to show up and use your voice. That's it.
I would just add, Gene, the four Bs, not like the 4 Cs here for those financial folks, but the 4 Bs: be strategic, be not afraid, be purposeful, and be an asset.
Thank you, Jason.
Gene, Jason Smith mentioned coaching, and I got a coach, and what made the engagement worth the investment was at the end of the engagement, he said, by the way, everybody already knows you're good enough. You can move on. And so I just want everybody to know you deserve your space at the table. Now it's time to move on to more strategic and impactful work.
I love that, Elena. I love that. We've already established ourselves. You are who you are. You can identify your own growth and development path yourself internally, but who you are is enough. And your voice and your perspective in the moment is valuable. We so appreciate the time that you've spent here sharing your time and thoughts with us. I really do want to thank you, Elena Anderson, Jason Evans, Jason Smith, and Tania White. Thank you, National Black MBAA Chicago chapter, for this opportunity to share our thoughts. And I hope that everyone takes advantage, seizes the day, and makes this new era of equity our time. Thank you.